question. It's a very long and very complex question that spans quite a few topics. So I'm not going to read the whole thing because by the time I'm done you'll have forgotten the beginning. But it's basically about the relationship between Europe and Russia and the dynamic between Europe and Russia. And do Europeans and others who have great fears of Putin and current-day Russia contribute to Putin and others' aggressive behavior? I've talked about a reality simulator where what you're projecting out is what is going to come back to you. So I assume the person is asking, are the Europeans projecting something into the cosmic mirror that's coming back in the form of Russia? And then the question is also about NATO and NATO's eastward expansion and the relationship with Russia. And what I would say about this, it's obviously a very big and complicated topic, but I don't actually agree that Europeans have great fears of Putin and Russia. Because I grew up in Europe, so as I was growing up, it was during the Cold War. And I wouldn't say I grew up with a lot of fear about Russia, because I just didn't know very much about Russia. There was the Iron Curtain. I mean, we knew there was something going on in there, but we had no idea. I mean, it was just a black box. We really had no idea how life was there and what was happening there. So I don't think there was a lot of fear of it. There was a certain fear of war, and I think what I actually sense from Europe is it's not so much a fear of Russia or a fear of war. It's more of a determination in Western Europe, in the democratic part of Europe, not to have war again on the European continent. And so obviously for many years the Soviet Union, it was a legitimate threat. I mean, it had a clear ideology of world domination, and we knew it was seeking to spy and undermine democracies and this and that. And that's why we grew up knowing that because we're in NATO, because NATO is strong, because attacking one country means you're attacking all countries, the Soviet Union was held at bay. So I won't say there was a lot of fear of this. But then when the Soviet Union dissolved, there was this really deep wave of hope that washed over Europe, that, we don't have to worry about the Soviet Union, or we don't even have to worry about Russia. And Boris Yeltsin, who dissolved the Soviet Union, actually expressed that he never wanted a situation again where anybody had to fear Russia as an aggressor. And then of course comes Putin, and there was certainly some concerns there about Putin, but one of the dominant figures in European politics was Angela Merkel in Germany, who was very much for what the question actually describes of allowing Russia to be part of the world, inviting Russia to be part of the world, and cooperating with the world. And I think most countries in Europe hoped that Angela Merkel's approach would work, and that Russia would gradually grow to become just part of Europe, part of the democratic world, a country we could trust and that we didn't need to fear. So I think there was this great sense of hope. And but there was still this sense of realism that we can't really know for sure where Putin is going, and there was of course certain signs, including him changing the constitution so he could stay in power, taking Crimea in 2014 and so forth. But even after he took Crimea in 2014, there was still this hope that, it's okay, eventually Russia will grow to become, a nation like us, basically. That was what Europe was hoping. Russia, when we treat Russia the way we treat each other, eventually Russia will become a nation like us, who is not aggressive, who is not threatening its neighbors. And so there was this hope. And I think it was, you know, maybe too rosy, but there was some realism that it could have gone in that direction. But then when Putin invaded Ukraine in 2022, he completely shattered that. I mean, literally shattered it. You can't even imagine what kind of a shockwave this sent through Europe. Because it was almost like a throwback to the Cold War, where this Russian bear had come out of its hibernation and was now roaring at us again. And I don't think this was an undue fear, an unrealistic fear of Russia. It was just a sensation or a realization that our experiment of treating Russia as a civilized democratic country had failed. It has simply failed. And now we faced a completely different reality that we then had to adjust to. And then there was still some hope that, well, we at least have the backing of the US, so we are back to the same situation where Russia doesn't dare to attack the smaller countries because we have the backing of the US. And then, of course, when Trump took office, and another shockwave went through Europe, because now we realize we can't trust America. As long as Trump is president, Europe can't trust America. And now there is, of course, the adjustment in Europe that we have to take care of ourselves. We have to become stronger. We have to take care of our own defense. And that's what you're going to see building in the next few years. So now let me comment on NATO. The person says, how does the effect or the current state of consciousness among Europeans today, how does this affect their diplomacy with Russia? Is this the reason behind NATO's continued eastward expansion, having to find a dragon to slay beyond their national borders in order to feel safe again? Well, see, I know that there are people who have come to believe in this claim that Putin had to invade Ukraine because he felt threatened by NATO's eastward expansion. And that if it hadn't been for that eastward expansion, he wouldn't have had to invade Ukraine. But this is just Russian propaganda, to be honest with you. And the reason why I'm saying this is, I said when I was a child, the Iron Curtain was there. We didn't know what was going on in the Soviet Union. But then the wall fell, and now we know much more about how life was in the Soviet Union. And I happened to live in Estonia for 5 years, which was a Soviet republic. And I'm married to a woman from Poland who grew up when she was young under communism in Poland, which was part of the Warsaw Pact. So I actually know quite a lot about the dynamic in Eastern Europe. And quite frankly, if we are honest about this, why didn't NATO expand after the Berlin Wall fell? Because the nations that have been dominated by Russia during Soviet times, they had experienced such horrendous brutality from Russia that their determination was, we never want to be dominated by Russia again. Never. And that's why, for example, the Baltic nations did everything they could to, as quickly as possible, qualify for NATO membership. And so for me, when I realized this, when I realized how difficult life was during Soviet times, how Estonia, for example, was exploited by Russia, I came to see NATO not as a defense alliance, but actually as a humanitarian alliance. Because the purpose is to make sure that they can never be dominated by Russia again. And you can say, if the Baltic countries had not become members of NATO, what would have happened? Well, Putin would have in some way, I mean, his declared goal is to restore the Soviet, even Tsarist Russia's boundaries. He would have in some way to try to take them over or dominate them. There really can't be any question about it. And it's proven by him invading Ukraine. And so, so the person also says that, where is it? That Putin has said that Russia could have become part of NATO. Oh, Putin has said it years ago that Russia has petitioned to join NATO and other European alliances only to be rebuked. That's not actually true. That's, again, it's simply Russian propaganda. I know that Putin, in a talk with Clinton, aired this idea, but there were never any serious negotiations because NATO has certain conditions for new members. And Russia never ever made a serious effort to fulfill those conditions. And couldn't, as long as Putin was president and basically the dictator, it couldn't qualify. There are certain qualifications you have to meet to become a member of NATO, and Russia has never even been close to qualifying, and that means they haven't really been serious about it. It's just something they say. So the other thing I would say about this, the whole claim that Russia had to attack Ukraine because they felt threatened that Ukraine could become part of NATO. Well, first of all, I don't think there was any really serious talks about this because, again, Ukraine was also quite far from meeting the requirements. But the thing is, NATO is a defensive alliance. It was created to defend Europe from the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was essentially Russia, dominating all of these outlying republics. So there has never been, and there isn't now, any strategy in NATO about invading Russia. It is simply propaganda to say that NATO has aggressive intents against Russia. They do have the intent, of course, of making sure that Russian aggression cannot affect other countries that are members of NATO, yes. But this, if Russia says this is aggression against Russia, this is like a bully saying that if you won't let me bully you, you are the aggressor who's attacking me. I mean, it's just kindergarten stuff, I'm sorry to say. I mean, how anybody can believe this stuff is beyond me. Because NATO is a defensive alliance. NATO will only NATO would never start a war. It would only engage in war if it's attacked, if one member country is attacked. And to say otherwise is just propaganda. I mean, it's just unrealistic. So, in the end, the questioner says, in terms of alliances with Europe, is this because of the lingering trauma and fear from the Soviet Union's occupation of Eastern Europe? If so, have these live streams created a massive group spirit that only perpetuates war and conflict? If so, Russians may have created a massive group spirit of inferiority, feeling constantly rejected by their European cousins, which only perpetuates their aggressive behavior. Well, of course, as I said, I lived in Estonia for 5 years. There is absolutely no question that the Estonian people were deeply traumatized by the 50 or so years they were dominated by Russia. And they had also been that earlier during Tsar's times. There's no question there's a trauma there in Eastern Europe. But as I said, it's really this, we never want to be exposed to Russian brutality again. And to me, it's again this. When an aggressor says that those who are defending themselves against this aggression that they are aggressors, it's just not credible. Russian brutality is what Russia needs to transcend, and many Russians have, of course, already done this. That's why they couldn't understand why Russia would attack Ukraine. That's why several million people have left Russia because they don't want to be part of this brutality. So many Russians have already done it. If you look historically, there's no question that Russia needs, in the long run, and hopefully in the little shorter run, to transcend the brutality that you see even in how they conduct the war in Ukraine, attacking hospitals, attacking emergency personnel, taking thousands of children to be re-educated in Russia, all of this stuff, all the civilian targets, the energy targets. I mean, it's just a level of brutality that, quite frankly, Europe has transcended. And so, yes, you can always say, is there a mass entity that never wants to be dominated by Russia again? Well, yes. But to say that that's causing Russia's aggression in Ukraine, I just don't feel that that's quite right. I think the Russian people have their own group entity that has something to do with a sense of inferiority, but not because they've been rebuked by the Europeans, because I don't think the Russians have ever been serious about being part of Europe. Partly because they have their own dynamic, which is partly both the inferiority and superiority complex, because in some ways they feel superior, and in some ways they feel inferior. It's just a very complicated psychology there. But the way I look at it is, if you look both at, you can look back at history, and then you can observe and project forward, right? And the whole world has progressed towards freedom and democracy and respecting human rights. In Tsarist times in Russia, the peasants had no rights whatsoever. They were literally slaves. Then they were freed from that, but then came communism, which enslaved them in other ways, and in some ways just as severely. And then communism, or so the Soviet Union, collapses, and they had a chance to have a more free society. But the only way I can explain it is not enough Russians really valued it. And that's why they attracted to themselves a leader like Putin, who has systematically taken away their freedom and their rights. And to me, it's because not enough Russians are willing to take responsibility for themselves and for their nation as citizens in democratic countries have done. I mean, you look at Estonia again, that I know quite well. The Estonian people, they were brutally suppressed during Soviet times. But as soon as they had a chance to be free, they just did everything that any human being can possibly do to raise themselves, to educate themselves, to do better. They went through such an incredible transformation, the same in Latvia and Lithuania. The transformation that the Baltic countries went through after the breakup of the Soviet Union is just astonishing. And it just shows you how willing they were to transcend themselves. And to me, the Russian people don't yet have that same willingness. I'm hoping they will at some point, but I don't see it yet. Because otherwise they wouldn't allow Putin to take over. Because you talk about in Russia that you have this social contract where the people are basically saying to Putin, yeah, you can do whatever you want as long as you let us have our daily lives. And don't interfere with that. And obviously Putin has broken that contract now, but I'm just saying it shows that they don't they just want to focus on their daily lives. They don't really want to take responsibility for the nation. They don't want to educate themselves. They don't even want to really educate themselves so they can make a good decision when they vote. Whereas what you saw in the Baltic countries was this incredible willingness to do better and to learn and to raise their countries up. That's why they became they qualified for NATO and EU membership. And Ukraine could have gone through the same transformation during the 90s, so that in 2004, when the Baltic countries became part of NATO, Ukraine could also have joined NATO. But it wasn't ready for it. Again, the people in Ukraine weren't as willing to transcend themselves as the people in the Baltics. So I just think that it's a very, very complex equation. It can't just be reduced to this. And I don't think it's reasonable at all to say that the nations in Eastern Europe and Western Europe, that they are projecting something that's causing the Russian aggression, because the Russian aggression is there in the Russian people. Otherwise, the Soviet Union wouldn't have become a threat. I mean, you have to ask yourself, why was it Russia that became the first country dominated by communism? Why did it take hold in Russia? Because there were communist movements in many European countries. They just never gained dominance. And that's something much deeper in the Russian psyche, which I'm not sure I even fully understand what that is. But I just think that I know you can always talk about this reality simulator and the cosmic mirror and say what you are projecting out is what comes back. So therefore, whatever comes back is what you're projecting out. But you also have to incorporate free will in the equation, because otherwise you are back to the same view that they have in India, for example, of karma, where they say that if someone comes and kills you, oh, you must have killed somebody in a past life and therefore you deserved it. But see, that's denying the fact that there is still always free will in the equation. You can have a person that never killed anybody, but still there is a deranged person who decides to kill that. This also happens. Can you really look at Jesus and say, oh, he must have crucified someone in a past life and that's why he deserved to be crucified? Or he projected into the cosmic mirror that he wanted to be crucified. You see what I'm saying? The karmic spiral started because there was somebody who was a perpetrator, somebody who started violating other people. And so you can't say that every time somebody is violated by another, it's because of something they did in the past. Because sometimes they are just aggressors that take aggressive actions. And you need to look at that and say, no, no, no. NATO is not an aggressive pact that threatens Russia. It only threatens Russia's expansion into Europe. But that's not really a threat to Russia. That's actually defending the people who don't want to be dominated by Russia. And I think they have a right to not be dominated by Russia.